Right, so the answers, which is not a structural classification. Is it fibrous, cartilage? Somebody help me.
Fibrocartilage or cartilaginous?
Cartilaginous. I don't know. Sometimes my brain stops working. And then we have the amphiarthrosis and synovial. So it is the amphiarthrosis, because that is a functional, not a structural. Which allows the least movement? Amphiarthrosis, diarthrosis, or synarthrosis? Is this synarthrosis? Do you want to tell them your trick?
Sad. Perfect.
So that's the trick. Remember SAD? That's an order from least to most. It's a good one. Which is not a subtype of synovial joints. Meniscus, plane, hinge, or saddle. This meniscus. Meniscus is like a part of a joint, right? What is a meniscus? There we go. Type of joint, fibrocartilage pad, type of adipose, or type of blood vessel. It's made of fibrocartilage. So you may have seen that little hard kidney bean looking thing in the knee, the chicken knee yesterday. That was the meniscus. And which joint type is made up primarily of dense connective tissue? Fibrous, cartilaginous, amphiarthrosis, or synovial? It is fibrous. It's that one. What do you think there's certainly some dense connective tissue in all of them. But the one that's just only dense connective is fibrous. What is the cartilage one made out of? It's made of cartilage, right? And then synovial, it's got the fluid and all the membrane and everything. All right. All right, so before we get started, it's the first day after the exams. You know what that means. You get to say goodbye to your group members. You get some new ones. All righty. So we talked all about bones, talked all about joints in lab yesterday. Now we get to go a little more detailed. So hopefully this will seem somewhat familiar since you looked at all those things yesterday. And so just a quick review that was on your quiz. We've got our 3 different structural classifications, and the way you categorize the joints from these is how the bones are attached together. So if they're attached together with dense connective tissue, it's fibrous. If they're connected together with cartilage, then they're cartilaginous joints. And if they've got the big complicated joint cavity with fluid and ligaments attaching them and all that business, then we know it's synovial. You can also, and a few examples just to remind you, you've got the suture joint, which if you're under 30, you've got that in your skull bones between them around. If you're over 30, you don't have that anymore. You just have bone to bone. For the cartilaginous, we saw the epiphyseal plate when we cut into the bone. So you just had bone, and then you had that thin layer of cartilage, and then more bone. And if you remember, did it move when you were like, could you just pull the top part of the bone off of it? You can't, right? So there's no movement for that one. Then you also have, if it's made of fibrocartilage, like the pubic symphysis, that allows some slight movement. Of course, that's made of cartilage. That's down at the bottom of the hip bone, between the 2 pubic bones. Synovial, this is generally when you think about joints, that's what you're thinking of. Knees, elbows, finger joints, toe joints, vertebrae joints. All the joints you think of, they're basically synovial. The ones that you don't really think of as joints are probably one of the other 2. And then we got our functional. So synarthrosis, no movement, amphorthrosis, some movement, not a lot, and then diarthrosis. And you can see some examples up there. We've got sutures, and then the pubic symphysis, and the diarthrosis. And so, once again, the ones you think of as joints are diarthrosis joints. Knees, elbows. Should we just do that song to practice? All right, so if you want some extra review, this is in here for you. I don't think we really need to go into it too much. I will pull it up because I probably want to go to it a little later. But we'll come back to that. So what is a joint? It's just very simply any place that two bones connect to each other, or where cartilage meets bone. An example of the epiphyseal plate. Because, right, the epiphyseal plate, that's within one bone, but it's a kind of cartilage connection within one bone. All right, which of these is a possible joint description? And so the first thing to remember is every joint gets a structural classification and a functional one, which automatically means C is not right, because that's two structural ones put together. You can't have two structural words put together like that. The first one, our fibrous diarthrosis. What's wrong with that one? Fibrous doesn't really move. What is diarthrosis? Freely moving. So that doesn't really make any sense. And then synovial synarthrosis. Yeah, so synarthrosis is basically immovable, whereas the synovial is the type of structure that allows for lots of movement. So you wouldn't really see that combination. And then, so we went over C. D, cartilaginous synovial. What's wrong with that one? It's two structures again, right? So that one can't be right. But E there, that one's just right. So it's cartilaginous and amphorthrosis, which is how much movement? So like a little bit of movement. So slight movement. Those match. I don't want you to think it's always like that, but it's pretty close. So we've got our three, and they basically match. So the fibrous ones, they're mostly synarthrosis. They allow a little movement. The cartilaginous ones are mostly a little bit of movement. So they're amphorthrosis. And then the synovial, they're mostly diarthrosis. So does it make sense they kind of go together? And that's because the structure determines the function of them. So if you're bound super tightly together with a bunch of dense fibrous tissue, you can't have much movement because that's how you're put together. Whereas if you've got, a ball and socket joint with that fluid and a couple loose ligaments, like your shoulder where you can, move it all around, that's because its structure allows for that, which makes it diarthrosis. All right, where are we? So just a few examples of where you might find these in your body. So our fibrous joints, we talked about the sutures in the skull. And then also that long fibrous tissue between your radius and your ulna right there. Not so much at the wrist and the elbow, but everything in between that we talked about. That's a second example. And also where your teeth connect to your bones is another example of that. Because obviously your teeth don't move too much, right? Hopefully not. All right, and then we have our cartilaginous. So got some cartilage, little to no movement. Once again, there's no synovial cavity in the fibrous or the cartilage joints. Two main kinds. We've got basically the epiphyseal plate. So that's called a synchondrosis. And the function of that one is to let the bone grow from the middle, basically. So if you think about, when we were looking at those growth plates, in order for that bone to grow longer, you need to have some kind of buffer, because you don't just grow right from the tip. It doesn't really work that way. Instead, we want to grow from there. So you need some joint there or some connection, because if it was completely bone to bone, there'd be nothing to push on. So we have our growth plate there. And then right next to it, you've got your cartilage. What kind of cartilage is it? Right? So it's different than the articular cartilage that's at the end here. It's that special kind of cartilage that's right in the middle of the bone. Do it? Yeah, I think it's easier to just think of it that way, though, just to keep yourself from getting confused. And then, of course, is there a cartilage up here, too? This is more of the hyoid. And so this way, you can make the middle of the bone longer without breaking the bone or anything. You just push down, and that can push up that way. So it allows for bone growth that way. And then the second kind is those fibrocartilage pads, like between the pubic bones. And its main function is to absorb shock. Because every time you step, you're getting all this force and shock going into your hips. You don't want that to just be absorbed by your bones. Instead, you want it to absorb into that fiber cartilage, so you can kind of squish a little bit, rebound, and take away all the shock from your vertebrae and your hip bones. So there they are. There's our pubic symphysis and our growth plates. So these are some tough words, right? So symphysis and then synchondrosis. So a couple more long words for you to remember that sound kind of similar. All right, we'll spend most of our time talking about synovial joints. They're the most complicated. They're obviously the ones that are more often broken or having problems. You never hear about anyone having a problem with their fibrous joints or anything like that. So synovial, there's a cavity, and there's also ligaments around them. There's nerves, there's blood coming to them, and they let you do a large range of movement. And of course, you saw all of that yesterday. And so some things to point out. Here's our example of just a standard synovial joint. So you can see the two bones, and then the articular cartilage between the bones in white there. And one thing you notice, does the cartilage touch each other, the two bones? So this is something that I think most people not in this class would say yes. It's cartilage rubs on cartilage, right? In your joints? Would you have said that maybe? But in reality, between the cartilage is the synovial fluid. So we've got two layers I guess it's 3 layers, 'cause one on each side, to help with that mobility and prevent the bones from rubbing on each other. So in yellow there is the synovial fluid. And you got to think of this in 3 dimensions, right? So around the synovial membrane, around the synovial fluid is a synovial membrane, which is in red there. So it's like a little balloon, sealed balloon. And so you've got the balloon, you've got one bone, and you've got the other bone on top of it. And on the outside is your fibrous membrane, which is basically the joint capsule, which also consists of those ligaments. So you saw those ligaments holding the bones together yesterday. That's part of the fibrous membrane on the outside. Did I forget anything? So what do each of those things do in there? The fluid in the middle does a few different things. So it absorbs shock really well. And it's a great lubricator, right? If you think about filling up a balloon with water and pushing on it, it's really easy to have 2 things moving past it, right? A lot easier than if you just, had grease or soap on your hands and did this. Like, that doesn't move so well. But put a balloon there, you can do all kinds of stuff. It also provides a way for that cartilage to get nutrients. So if you remember, cartilage doesn't have blood vessels. So in order for cartilage, like the cells in there, to get oxygen and glucose, it has to come from the membrane through the fluid to the cartilage. Like we talked about before, the membrane makes the fluid and contains it. The articular cartilage reduces friction. And lastly, those fibrous membranes holds the bones together. Because there's 2 main things you want from your joint, right? You want it to be able to move easily, but you also want the bones to be attached together. So that's what those ligaments are for. And what do tendons attach together? So muscle to bone. And I guess one thing to point out that those, the musculature around the joints also gives them stability and strength. And you may have noticed when you're doing your chicken leg, once you started cutting off the tendons and the muscle, that joint got looser and looser. So it's not just the ligaments doing it. It's the tendons and the muscle holding it together too. But we'll get more into that when we talk about the muscles. All right, so which of these is not a function of our synovial fluid? All right, so we're tied between C and F. So the answer is actually D. Well, I'm talking about as the fluid. So there may be a few macrophages in there, but that's not really its function. I mean, you have macrophages everywhere in your body. So ideally, your blood is mainly what's getting rid of your pathogens. So it's kind of hard to imagine how you'd get bacteria into that joint fluid. You'd probably have a pretty severe systemic infection for it to get in there. So D is not their function. All of those other ones are. And what did y'all choose? A lot of C's? Is that what it was? So it acts as a medium for diffusion of wastes. So it's probably because I didn't say it, but if it acts to let nutrients come to those cells, do those cells make waste too? They do, right? It has to go somewhere. So they put it back into the fluid, and then the blood vessels around that membrane will take up the waste, send it to the kidneys or to the lungs, depending on what kind of waste we're talking about. So we've got lubrication, diffusion of nutrients, diffusion of waste, and shock absorption. Did anyone get to do this yesterday? So this is part of the lab. And if you fill up your glove here, it's really easy to move one bone against the other. So this is like your synovial membrane with synovial fluid in it. This would be a bone, this would be a bone, and you can kind of see how they're, because you can't compress water, right, very easily. So that's why it makes a great shock absorber and lets you move just like so. Somebody want to play with this? Can't trust you. Might throw it at somebody, I don't know. All right, so most of your freely movable joints would be classified as blank and blank. All right, so B is exactly right, synovial and diarthrosis. So I have a quick check-in. All right, so just to make sure this is sinking in, we're going to have you label a synovial joint. And to make sure you actually know it, you can't use any notes or your book for this one. We will go over the answers after, but we'll try it as sort of a quiz for yourself. All right, so just make sure you got the answers. I had FBDCA for this. All right. All right, so this one's for your group. So it's question 2. I want to know 2 unique things about each of those. So something that's true of synovial that's not true of the other 2. And 2 things that are true of cartilaginous. Yeah, A, B, and C. All right. Any questions on there? Looks like y'all got plenty of good answers. Nothing too complicated there. All right, so most of the rest of the time we're going to work with all the different movements that can happen at joints. And I have a fun little activity to do with them a little bit, but we go ahead and go over them first, because they can be a little confusing, at least keeping track of all these different words. So you saw your study guide. What did I put, like 10 of these on there? Or 8? I don't know, there's a lot. All right, so for fun, I'm going to have everybody stand up, and we'll just go through these with actually moving our bodies to wake up a little bit. I'm too hungry. All right, so the first thing to remember is most of the time when they're talking about these, you're starting at your anatomical position. That's how they'd compare it. So you got your head, and we could do our flexion at our neck. What would that be? Like this. So it is like an actual movement. That'd be your flexion. Now when you go back, what's that? Extension. If you go farther back, what's that? That's your hyperextension. So the difference between extension and hyperextension is whether you go past the anatomical position. So like what would this one be? It'd be flexion, extension, hyperextension, right? So one thing to note, is hyperextension always bad?
No, like in your knee.
So your knee is not supposed to hyperextend, right? Can you hyperextend your knee? Hopefully not. If it comes up to there, that's bad. Then we've got, so you can happen at your shoulder, elbow, And one thing to notice, most of the time flexion extension is front and back, something like that. So I had all those up there for that slide. We've got more, don't sit down. What else can we do? We also have our adduction and abduction. So this is more from the side. So we've got abduction would be this, and then adduction would be going back.
If you do like the B is going away and then the B is towards the A, that's how I interpret it.
Say it one more time.
Like the B is facing away from the A, so it's away
Oh.
from the body, and then adduction is towards the
Okay,
body. That's how I always
that makes
feel
sense. Like the B's pointing out, the D's pointing in. It's a good way to remember it. You could also do it at your wrist. So if you go like so, and you can even do it. Let's do our hip. So abduction of a leg, all right? That's abduction. Adduction is back. How come there's not a third one for past? Well, you can go back. It's just a farther adduction because it's left and right, right? Also your hands, this is abduction, adduction, abduction, adduction. What else we got? Whoops, that's the wrong way. All right. Circumduction is like a circle, just like it sounds. So your main ones that do that are your shoulder joint, kind of like that. And it can be kind of any direction that's a circle, right? That's circumduction, that's circumduction. You do it with your leg. If you've done any kind of Pilates stuff, they're always making you do circumductions with your toes. Yeah. Right. And the second one, this one's a little more confusing. So these are our lateral and medial rotation. So if you're moving something away from the body, that's lateral, like away from the midline. And if you're coming back, that's medial. Lateral rotation, medial rotation. You could do the same thing at your hip, right? By facing your foot different directions, left and right. So putting it out as lateral, bringing it back in as medial rotation. Lateral. And you could also do that at your head, right? So that's lateral rotation, that's medial. Lateral, medial. And then the last one. So pronation, supination. Pronation, supination. I can't think of any other joints you can do that at. I'm trying to think. Can you think of any other ones? I'm trying to think. You can try with your foot. I don't know. It'll be tough. All right, thanks. All right, so what about this one? Chuck's at a pizza parlor, yada, yada, yada. He holds up his hand and spreads his fingers. What type of movement was this? So most people chose D. That's one right answer. Is that the only right answer? So, well, let's see. What if I do this? What's that? So that'd be extension, right? Sorry, wait. That'd be flexion. And then this was the abduction. What if he raised his hands like that? What would that be? Take a look at this picture again. What's this? Right? So depending on how he raised his hand, it could be abduction or it could have been flexion. Definitely the finger part is the abduction. That's true. But what I wanted to point out with that one is I would never have a text question like this on a test because you have to talk about what joint you're talking about for it to be accurate. Because otherwise, I don't know what you're talking about. So shoulder joint, so it could have been abduction at the shoulder or flexion at the shoulder, abduction of the fingers. So you need to have something like talk about the joint or the bone, something to describe where the movement is, so someone knows what you're talking about. And obviously for now, we haven't gone over all the joints yet. So if you call it your jaw joint or your neck joint, that's fine, at least for today. All right, so how about this one? With your group, why don't you come up with at least 3 movements that got Mr. Michael Jordan looking like that. And you remember, you're going to have to tell me what joint, too, not just the word. What joint or what bones? Yeah, definitely. I think that's probably plenty. You could probably come up with more, too. That's kind of the idea. All right. So for this one, so we got a good amount of time to practice these. So the way this one's going to work is your group. Do you know your group numbers still? Right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So each group's going to come up with 2 different movements. And to make it more challenging, you don't have to start here and move. You can start wherever you want and make a movement. And you're going to come up with 2 different ones, but you're going to basically demonstrate them one at a time. The other groups are going to try to write down the movement and where it happened at, and we'll keep score if you want and see which group can accurately get all of the movements.
Just at one joint?
All right. So the way this will work is we'll have the first group's going to stand up and do their movement. And then y'all are all in your group's going to write down what you think the answer is. And then they're going to come tell you if you're right or not and give you a +1 or an X for each one. And then we'll go group 2, group 3. Does that make sense? And in order for everyone to be able to see it, for your group, we'll have to have like 2 of you standing over here, 2 of you over there, like so. Hey, you're all in this together. And remember, when you're grading them, so when you're grading them, if they only write abduction and they don't tell you what bone or joint, is that right? No. It's not. All right, so let's go backwards. Let's do 6 first. So come on up, spread yourselves out up here. And we'll have them do each movement twice. So they'll do movement 1 twice. All right. see what we got. I know this is silly, but whatever. All of you have to do it. We want you to feel left out. All right, so that was number 1. And number 2. All right, so we'll give them 30 seconds to discuss their answers, and then you're going to go out and grade them. I know, I think you get to see it twice, and that's it. Oh, so yeah, within your groups, pick one person to have the group answers. So they only have to grade one paper when they go out there.
They get 1 or 2 points.
Well, if they get each one right, each one's 1 point. So, be fun. Well, we're not playing for money here or anything. Yeah. You don't know.
Wait, you guys did the second one already?
Yes. Uh-huh. Oh, right. Yeah, well, I mean, you can do like this, right?
That's true.
So it's the same movement. We don't want to break anyone's pubic symphysis. Ah! You can't all do the splits? What's wrong with you?
We're hoping you would.
Yep, can't do that.
Everybody's? Do I grade everybody's?
Just each, they should have all the same answers. So you just grade one person from the group. And then, they got theirs.
Can I go to other groups?
I think Jordan did all 3. Did y'all get checked back there? All right. All right, number 5.
So the arm be right or shoulder be right? Like what's the correct?
Both would be fine.
Same? Okay.
Yeah. I think we need our group 6 to be done. All right, so group number 5, movement number 1.
Starting here.
Okay. So do one more time. Sorry. So this is the starting position, and then the movement is. All right. You ready for number 2? All right, movement number 2. You'll still have some time to talk about it before they grade it. So number 2, what you got? Starting position. So all right, one more time. Starting position. Movement. Yeah. All right. So whenever y'all think you have the answers, one of the group people will come give you a grade and tell you if you're right or not. good to have some tricky ones. All right. Well, it's up to that group to tell you. I don't know.
Wrong if they put the wrong body.
Right, like movement, it's just like,
Well, how far off are you?
Or like body and they put.
Oh, no, that's fine.
Oh, okay.
So you could basically say either the joint or like the bones. Both would kind of work. All right, so group number 4. I'm assuming y'all are telling them the right answer if they get it wrong, right? All right, y'all ready? Movement number 1, starting position, and the movement. Do you need them to do it again? Yes. All right. So starting there and the movement. All right. So that's number 1. So we'll give them a second to discuss. Definitely gave them a slightly challenging one. That's good. What? All right. So movement number 2. Do it. What? I know y'all can all do that at least a little bit. All right. So starting position and movement.
Where's the picture? You got this one. Isn't that what it is? So they was from this to that. Rotation.
All right. So once you think you have the answers, just raise your hand and one of those group mates will come check you. You got a perfect score so far?
yep. I fought for those 2 points, but we got it.
I wouldn't guess the version.
Do your vertebrae twist? Not your hips? Your hips are both?
But they did it like from their foot this way.
Oh wait, which are you talking about theirs? Wait, which one? This thing? Yeah, I mean, there's the vertebrae do turn a little bit. They can rotate. Yeah, no, it's the hip too.
So we get plus 2 then.
Well, yeah,
heck yeah.
gotta think about it. Yeah, your hip's moving. Yeah. Are they? Yeah, I guess so.
Is this how big you're gonna be?
We'll have easier ones probably on our test. Not these crazy ones y'all come up with. All right, so we're almost out of time. So I think we don't want anyone to not get to do theirs. So we'll just do it lightning round. So we'll just have y'all do it, and then whoever thinks they know what it is will tell you. We don't need to go, the grading and everything, but we want everyone to get to perform. All right, so movement number 1. Yeah, you can just yell it out because we don't have time for. Yeah. So who thinks they know? Raise your hand or shout it out, whatever.
Hyperextension and extension.
Okay, but of which is which? Which leg?
The back foot is, or one leg back is hyperextension.
Mm-hmm.
Right leg is back extension.
Mm-hmm.
Left leg is extension. Or flexion. Yeah.
All right, cool. That's a good one. Then we got a second movement. What are y'all doing for this one? Starting and movement.
Do you guys start from the middle and then go from the
So they're starting here. All right, so what's that one? Rotation. All right, so we'll do group 2 then. We'll get you out of here in a second. Nice work. I was expecting to see the real splits. That's what I was waiting for.
I don't even know either.
All right, so group number 2, movement number 1. What you got? So where are you starting? Sorry. It's medial rotation, and then the other one.
Rotation of the arm.
Well, so that one's hard because you're not getting closer or farther away from the midpoint, and you're also this angle isn't changing. So you would just call it like general rotation. All right, so group 1, do real fast. We'll get you out of here in 1 minute.
So it's kind of like one movement, but we'll do it in 2 separate ways.
Okay.
So the first one is. Okay, and then the second part of it is.
Those are so easy. Like,
Aren't you all so proud of your classmates for guessing all your movements?
See y'all on Thursday.
All right, well, I'll see you Thursday for part 2.